Hello there, and welcome along to another episode of Talking Tech. My name is Michael Oliver, and I am the head of marketing at Client Server Tech Recruitment. And every episode of Talking Tech, we like to explore a little bit of the issues surrounding the tech industry. So whether that is getting into sort of the nitty-gritty of best practice through to some of the more wider issues, we cover it all here on Talking Tech. And like I mentioned, I am the head of marketing at Client Server. We are a tech recruitment consultancy based in the United Kingdom here in London. And one of the many things that we like to do is, like I said, we want to talk about as many different things and many different issues around the world of tech. And certainly one of the big issues that has been sort of not only shaping the United Kingdom's tech industry, but certainly tech just around the world in general, whether that is how a business positions itself through to how people think about businesses when they're thinking about joining them, to work and to join engineering teams, and considering the sort of the wider issues around working for a company. A lot of those issues have sort of narrowed in on the ideas around diversity and inclusion. And certainly a lot of companies who we've been working with have put diversity and inclusion right at the top of their wish list. But what does that actually mean? And what can businesses do to make a diversity and inclusion policy not just something that they have to tick boxes, but something that is real, something that is tangible, and something that actually delivers results? Well, we're very, very lucky here on Talking Tech because we have not only a great guest, but we've got a man who has, I'd say, almost fashioned his entire professional career around the idea of making diversity and inclusion something that businesses should take seriously. He's all the way from, I think he's on the West Coast in the United States. He is the technical advisor to Microsoft's CTO, a software engineer by trade. So he knows the ins and outs of the world of coding as well as the broader issues too, and is a staunch advocate for diversity and how businesses should be doing it properly. So it's my privilege to welcome along to Talking Tech, William Adams. Hi, William. How are you doing?
Hello, Michael. Good morning. Well, good morning for me. I'm doing great.
Fantastic. As I mentioned, you work as you've listed as a technical advisor to the CTO at Microsoft. Could you just explain a little bit more about what that role involves and how was it that you came to work for Microsoft?
Yeah, well, I'll explain. So my history at Microsoft is I've been there for about 24 years. 1998, I joined, and I joined to work on tech. I was a coder. I'm always a coder. I code every day now. And I worked on this thing called XML. And that was the birth of it way back in the day. And I've just worked on various things. And part of my earliest part of my career, I thought, well, and before Microsoft, I had my own company. So I've done engineering and built engineering teams and hired people and all that sort of stuff. And as I was moving along in Microsoft, I found that helping engineers become better engineers was something that I was very interested in. And pretty early on, I was also interested in getting more women into our engineering team. So it was around 98, 99. And you'd look around and there's a really good team had maybe 9% women, It's like, even back then, it wasn't great. And I just thought, well, we can do better than that. And it has to do with where you look for people and all that. Rolling right along, I did a lot of things, and I eventually ended up in the office of our CTO. I can't remember, it was 2017. I think it was 2018. And that was just a process where we had a new CTO, Kevin Scott, and we needed to form a group, the office of the CTO. And I was just luckily chosen, a name out of a hat, probably. I was nominated to be our first technical advisor. And that just means that we help synthesize what's happening in the industry to help feed Kevin, because he's the one who helps the company go in a particular direction or not. That's technical advisor. Along the way, I was created this program called LEAP in 2015, which was about hiring women and minorities specifically, because it was just this problem. It's one of those perpetual problems that we say, we want to hire more women and minorities, we want to be more inclusive, and then kind of nothing happens because we say, oh, there's a pipeline problem, or there's just not enough qualified candidates. We make a lot of excuses. And I just thought, well, let's stop making excuses and let's just do something that is actually actionable rather than just continually doing pipeline plays. And by that, I mean K through 12 programs or whatever, but we don't actually hire anyone. So that's my brief. And I mean, there's 24 years of history in there, but that's the brief of what I do or what I have done.
You mentioned that you still code every day. What particular sort of languages do you find yourself working in the most? What's kind of got your attention from a technical perspective?
Well, today and for the past, I don't know, 6 months, it's been C++. And I cycle through languages. Like I've been a C++ expert 30 years ago, but then the language changes, right? And then new languages come. So I was a C# expert for a decade, and I picked up this other language called Lua because it's a scripting language. It's not JavaScript, and Python and all sorts of other things. But today it's C and C++. Because I'm doing some low-level stuff with graphics. I'm doing a video DJ app for my own pleasure. And other than that, C# is probably the one that I use the most because that's what we use a lot at Microsoft.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And if you're thinking about sort of where you started, I mean, a lot of certainly a lot of people kind of like, no one really kind of a lot of people don't really fall into the world of coding and technology. Certainly, it's a lot more available now than it certainly was, say, 20 years ago. But were you kind of a techie kid growing up? Were you the kind of kid who would play around with QBasic and take apart computers and put them back together? Were you always
totally
kind of mindset?
Yeah, my ancient history, and there's actually the Computer History Museum in Silicon Valley did a piece on me and my brother, our earliest history and journey through Silicon Valley back in the day. But I started when I was like 12. I got this computer called a Commodore PET from my uncle. And this was one of those computers like tape drive and, you're programming in assembly language. And yeah, there's BASIC, but even before QBasic existed, you wrote an assembly code. So I taught myself assembly code back in the day. And then later BASIC came, and I went off to college with my Commodore 64, and then finally met up with VAX PDP 10 and 11, and along the way, card punch machines and line printers and all the rest. This is all ancient tech, right? All before the PC really emerged. And then, of course, the PC comes, and I did that whole thing, IBM PCs, and eventually at Microsoft, it's all PCs, and now it's cloud computing. So yeah, that's how I got started. I was just one of those precocious kids that's like, I'm going to do programming. Programming didn't even exist for the layperson at that time, but I was just hooked, right?
So you find you're now at Microsoft. A lot of people who'll be sort of tuning in, particularly on this side of the Atlantic, will be sort of fascinated by what the coding environment and the working environment is at Microsoft. Can you give us a little bit of a flavor of what it's like there at the moment? What are the teams doing? What are the things that you're focusing on?
Well, first I'll start with our company mission, which is to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more, right? It's pretty succinct. It's like, okay, that can mean lots of different things, but at the end of the day, it means we produce the software that helps run the planet, right? And not to diss any of our competitors, but we're not the people who are just trying to get you to click on ads. I mean, it's part of our business actually does that. Bing does that. But there's so much more, right? It's like the spreadsheets, the documents, the database servers, everything. We help run businesses. So having the mission that we have and having the breadth of applications that we do, we're a bunch of smart people and very conscientious of that place in the world where we have to write software that's helping people run their businesses. So people care about that, right? It's like you can't just, I don't know. You can't just think what I do doesn't matter. It's like, well, what you do does matter, you know. And having bugs in the software does matter because it'll bring down things like half the internet or whatever. So you have to really be conscientious about what you're doing and not just chase after things like free lunches or massages after 5 or whatever. It's like, well, sure, but we're here to achieve a particular mission, and if you're not into that mission, you're probably not going to really want to be there. But I find it to be um, a very reasonable place, a very fun place, a very exciting place. I mean, I've been there 24 years, and I've always found challenge and things that I want to do. And the things I do are not easy. I really pushed the company. When I started Leap, that was at a time which was like I said, we weren't hiring women and minorities very quickly. And I just said, enough's enough. We're doing this. And now it's 7 years later, and that program has grown and it's embraced by the fullness of the company. I no longer run it. But I was able to force that change, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I like about the company is that whether it be a technical thing or a culture shift, because Leap is more about culture shift than anything else. The company is adapting and malleable enough, even though it's one of the world's biggest companies, to accept changes, right? And that's what you get out of the leadership from like Satya Nadella, who's just like, look, how we do stuff matters. Humanity matters. Diversity matters. And it's written into people's reviews. It's not just lip service. So that's how the company is in a nutshell.
Absolutely. I mean, you're a staunch advocate for diversity and inclusion, but thinking about the way things are here in March 2022, I guess you could speak more readily from the American perspective. But what is your take on the way diversity and inclusion is being used within the tech space now? Is it still a sense that a lot of businesses think this is something we need to be doing, needs to be something we're embracing, but we've got code to ship, we've got other things going on, and we're kind of like, ship it to the side. What are some of the challenges facing us right now?
I think we have all levels of understanding and implementation. So some people, they hear the words diversity and inclusion, and to them it means this nagging thing that shareholders are bothering us about. Let's go get a checkbox, right? Some people are in that camp. Some people are fully aware that having more inclusion means better product. Having diverse perspective means better product. If you're a world scale company, you can't act like everything was designed in one place in the world and have a hope to serve the rest of the world, right? I mean, that makes no sense on the face of it. It's like what I developed for people here where I live in Seattle, maybe that has zero relevance to somebody in Kenya. It would be better if I had some engineers in Kenya because they're going to know better how to either adapt what I've done or to just create something completely new for that market, right? So, and then when it comes to implementation, again, you have everything from checkboxes like, well, we've got to hire 5 Blacks, 2 women, 3 lesbian, Hispanics. I mean, it's like, it's a checkbox game. And that's like, well, that's a process we're going to have to go through because people don't really, until recently, haven't really understood what it is, why should they care, and what does not doing a checkbox look like. So I think we're everywhere on the spectrum of understanding and implementing. And for me, it's I just recognize it all for what it is and say, let's just keep moving forward, right? Let's educate more. Let's demonstrate by implementation why this is even useful, right? If you're going to work on a world stage, you have to be more inclusive. That's all there is to it. And companies that don't do that just aren't going to succeed.
I think there's almost like a parallel because yesterday was International Women's Day. And one of I guess every company that has any presence on social media was eager to bring up what they are doing to celebrate the women they work with, and everything kind of around that. And then the more kind of, I'm going to say cynical, perhaps even skeptical, saying, well, you have X number of women sitting on the board, or your gender pay gap is X amount. So it feels like there is still that kind of the little cognitive dissonance between what businesses are saying and what they're presenting in their marketing versus the reality of what is happening on the ground floor. I feel like, is there a sense that a lot of businesses have seen it as a PR exercise as opposed to something that can make them better?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I meant by full spectrum. It's like you have plenty of companies who lip service it and say, yeah, we care about women and minorities and blah, blah, blah. And then you look at their numbers like, well, how come you have no leaders that are any of those things you just said you care about, right? And some companies are seriously working on it, and they're doing the transformative things that are required, even if it looks like a checkbox game in the beginning. But they're trying to do something. And others are purely like, yeah, we just said that. We don't have any intention of doing anything like that. It's the good old boys club. So yeah, you have both kinds of companies. I've stayed at Microsoft this whole time because I think it's not one of those checkbox companies. Now, we're a big company, and I'm sure you'll find plenty of leaders within the company that are of the checkbox mindset, right? And they're paying lip service. And we got plenty of old boys clubs within the company. But it's also big enough that not the whole company's like that, right? Yeah. There's plenty of people who see the truth of diversity and inclusion. They're like, yeah, let's do this thing, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think you have all sorts. But the key is, let's keep moving forward, right? Let's not stop here, because this is you could call it the tokenization phase of the process, where we say, we've got the checkboxes. Those are tokens. So let's get past that and truly be inclusive of those people and valuing them for what they bring, not because they satisfy some checkbox, right? Or they're a PR stunt or whatever.
Absolutely. There are certainly businesses who have good intentions, and like you said, they want to start. Well, I say want to start. Perhaps even they've already started, but they want to make it something that's not only consistent, but will just bed into their workflow, into their process, to the point where it's just almost a matter of fact. And certainly, like we are a tech recruitment company, and we work with companies across a wide range of industries and sizes, everything from startups through to the multinationals. And a lot of businesses are saying, like, this is top priority in terms of the people we want to hire and what our processes are. But then a lot of companies have come to us and said, well, this is something we know it's good. We've read the research. We know that a more diverse and inclusive workforce means that we produce more diverse and inclusive results, and the business as a whole will grow. But we haven't got the foggiest idea about how to do this, how to start, and then how to do this properly. So what would you say to those businesses that want to do this and want to do this well? What are some of the things they should be thinking about?
Yeah, one of the keys is, and I'll talk about work that we did in Africa recently. A few years back, we had no engineering on the whole entire continent of Africa. And Africa, for most people, if they don't realize it, is actually like 54 different countries. And it represents a huge mass in terms of land area of the planet. So to have zero engineering on the entirety of that continent really stands out. You spin a globe, and there's dots all over the place of where we have engineers, and you spin to Africa, and it's just dark, and there's nothing there. And I looked at that and said, well, we just need to change that. So I went and hired some engineers in Kenya to get the ball rolling. And then we just kind of snowballed from there. And now we have 450. To get started is really, it requires somebody within that organization who has enough authority to hire some people or go in a direction to say, we're going to start. Before that, you probably had to have a plan. Like, well, what are you doing? Are you just, are you going for checkboxes, or are you trying to actually transform something? My thought in going into Africa was, if I can, on the entire continent, get 2,000 engineers in place on a permanent basis, that's going to mean there's an excess stream of a couple of hundred a year that can go other places as well, including the US, right? A strategy there is, first of all, let's create a diverse workforce right there in Africa. And in Africa, the challenge is not just about skin color, because most people are Black, or very diverse anyway, but it's really about like tribals and women specifically, because that's the minority in the workforce. Here in the US, it's usually about Hispanics and African Americans. So you have to have some sort of a plan. You have to have, and it's hard because there's plenty of people who will claim to be diversity and inclusion. There's a whole industry of people who are experts, experts at diversity and inclusion. They're typically shoved off into the HR department and made toothless, right? Because in our company, at least, it's the hiring managers who make the actual hiring decision, not HR. So you have to create a plan that's appropriate for your culture, right? If recruiting and HR are the ultimate power, then they're the ones that have to drive it. If it's a tech company, it's probably the hiring managers who really have to be convinced, and they need to come up with a plan. And part of their plan has to be what I call cultural immersion. They need to go in with humility and say, I don't know anyone who's Black. So you don't just turn to the only one Black person and say, hey, hire me 100 people, right? That's not the way to do it. The way to do it is to become you're not going to become a member of that community, but to let that community know that you're interested in their well-being, right? You don't show up as the imperialist or the new imperialist, the capitalist imperialist, and say, hey, I know what's right for you. Get on the bus. I'm going to show you the promised land. That's not the way to do it. Those communities will just shut you out because they'll just view you as a new conqueror. But if you go in with humility and say, hey, we don't have people like you in our process, and we want to have you in our how we create our products. What are you interested in, right? What motivates you? What are your key concerns? It's asking those questions with a mind towards actually listening and wanting to know and wanting to help them with their challenges and their problems and their whatever. So I think you do things like that to help you set a stage and say, okay, now I've listened to you. And I hear, and this was a strategic thing we did, we said no brain drain, right? You don't go into Kenya and hire 200, 300 people and pull them out of Kenya, because all you're doing is destroying that community. So you have to have a strategy that says, I want to hire you in place, in your community. I want to strengthen your community, not destroy it, right? So you have to have a plan that says, today this is a little bit easier. Yeah, we're going to allow remote work. We're going to listen to your community. We're going to have local leadership there, and not just show up with our own leadership and say, now you're just going to do what we tell you to do. It's all these things combined, right? So it's a more humane approach, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was a really interesting point, because I was going to ask, like, how did you strike the balance between being able to imbue that kind of sense of culture, and by that I mean like the company culture, on what is ostensibly a remote, a largely remote sort of workforce, but still do it in a way that is, for want of a better word, is good. Do you find that there is, certainly like in the last 2 years with remote work becoming more and more prevalent, that those sort of goals were a lot easier to achieve, or was it the catalyst for that, or did it just sort of change the way those kind of conversations were had?
Yeah,
what was the?
I think it has made the possibilities a little easier, because we've already cracked the net of, hey, these people are not all going to be sitting in this office over here, right?
Yeah.
So now I think there's the combination of you need to hire good talent no matter where it is on the planet. We already do this for people who are in countries that we're familiar with. No one has a problem hiring a bunch of people out of Romania, right? Why? Because they're familiar, right? No one has a problem hiring people out of the UK. Why? Because it's familiar. You're all English speaking, and we can talk and all that sort of stuff is a similar culture. People do have a problem hiring people out of Kenya. Why? They're just as smart, but we don't have any connections there. Well, they do speak English, so what's the problem? Well, I don't personally know anyone from there, and it's not my tribe. So therefore, I'm not going to feel as comfortable hiring there as from the UK.
Yeah.
But we're already doing the remote thing. We already have people in the UK. We already have people all over the planet. So it's not any more than that to say we're going to hire people in a different place. We're already doing it, but not those kind of people, right?
Yeah.
So that's the disconnect. Is essentially it's like, well, yeah, the pandemic has helped accelerate the whole remote thing, and I go even further and say it's not just about remote; it's about distributed development, because we're going even further and saying we don't want Redmond to be the center of all things. We want these individual regions to be able to sustain themselves with work that's meaningful within that group even. It accrues to the larger whole, but it shouldn't, everyone should not have to report back to someone in Redmond directly, right?
Yeah.
They should be able to drive their own things. But I think it's essentially, we're just not familiar with certain places. So it's harder to convince ourselves that it's okay to go there. But if you said we're going to hire in the UK, no one would even bat an eye, or Australia for that fact, and there's a pattern there, right? So where you're familiar, it's really easy. And when you're not familiar, it's like, I don't know, you got a lot of questions. So that's what I think it is.
Do you find that initial conversation about having to, convince someone perhaps a little further up the chain that actually the talent is there? Yes, they can code in C#, they can code in C++. The quality of their work is good. What was those initial conversations like? Is it almost like you needed to act a little bit like a movie star agent and say, listen, I can vouch for the skills here. It's there. I've seen it.
Yeah, there's a combination of things. One is, for me at least, I had a stature at the company that I've been around long enough that people, when I say things, it's not like, oh my God, William has spoken, but it's like, I have some street cred, right? It's like, I've been around, I know people, I've shipped product, I've built teams. I helped us build our India team for 3 years, 2006 to 2009. I actually lived in Hyderabad. So I've demonstrated time and time again. It's like, I know what I'm doing, right? It's not easy to ignore me. So you had to have someone who can speak with, and this is part of the formula of how you do this. You had to have someone who speaks with credibility and has the trust of people. We made a video. I would call it the shame video, where I just plainly say, look, we say our mission is to empower everyone on the planet. There's 1.2 billion people here on this continent, and we have 0 engineering here. These two don't match. we need to hire people here. And then it's just going through the Rolodex and like, hey, look, would you like to go and hire 10 people? Would you like to go hire 5? There's some amount of that gets going. And after the first set of people were hired, then we can go to the executive level and say, look, we worked it out. We know what the salaries are. We've proven that there's good people. We think there's this many more good people. The ones we hired already have friends. This is the plan. And they can go, okay, right? It's harder in our culture, in Microsoft culture, to go to the top and say, we need to be in Africa, and to have them follow through. It's like, well, that's not their job. It's our job at the lower levels to actually prove that it can work, and then essentially present a done deal and say, look, we proved that it can work. And then they can go, okay, sounds good. Here you go. Go build it big, right? So that's pretty much how it has to work in our culture, right? Other companies might be different.
Absolutely. I think the interesting thing there is that like you said, that the talent was there, the ability to be able to code and decode well was there. And I think my world is marketing, so I constantly think of the world in terms of funnels. If you're thinking like the talent is there at the bottom of the funnel, the ability is there, but there's also a line of thinking, isn't it, that towards the top, how do we get more minorities, a more diverse pool of people to consider engineering and tech as a career? And I know things like there are online academies and courses, and anyone can watch something on YouTube or Skillshare and and pick it up. But there does still seem to be a disconnect between this is more than just a potential hobby or a passion project. This could
Right.
be a career. What can be done more to get more people to take this up as a potential career, even from early stage? What
Yeah.
sort of things should businesses be thinking about, or is it even up to businesses to be kind of encouraging that?
I think it is absolutely up to businesses because at the end of the day, you can train kids K through 12 through college like tech, tech, tech. And if they get out and there's no job for them, it was all
Mm,
for naught, right?
yeah,
So at Microsoft, at least, we have several programs, and this is true of many companies where uh, what they had previously was pipeline programs, K through 12, go into the schools, curriculum. We have a program called TEALS where our people and many people of other companies go into high schools and teach the teachers how to teach computer science, and on and on. Girls that code, DigiGirls, Minecraft training. We have tons of that kind of programming. The key part is to connect that programming to the internships and
yeah,
apprenticeships and actual hiring. That's the key. And this is where the LEAP program stepped in because we had tons of pipeline and there were all these coding academies and people are standing up like, I want to be a coder. But they're not in our hiring stream because you look at the resumes and it's like, well, you don't have a CS degree. And that was the end of it, right?
yeah,
But I went to a coding academy. It's like, we don't recognize those as being useful. So
yeah,
you have to change that where you say,
mm,
okay, well, we didn't get you as a college intern, but we still want you to have an intern-like experience. So what can we do? I have a phone that's ringing back there. I'm sorry. I hope you can't hear it. So
okay,
what we had to do is create this opportunity, and this is what other companies should be able to do, is to create an opportunity that's kind of off the beaten path. We all know what the college intern thing looks like. You go to the college, you sign up interns a year early, and then they show up, and then you hire them, right?
hmm,
Well, you need an apprenticeship program, if you will, for people who aren't coming through that college path.
yeah,
They're coming from other careers. They were in biotech. They were an astrophysicist. They were a mathematician or whatever. They were a mom who was in tech and she stayed home to raise her family. All of these people are viable candidates, but you need a mechanism to get them into your pipeline, right? And the
yeah,
same K through 12. So I think we should be investing in K through 12 programs as well, um, because you can't rely on governments to do all that. It's like, well, why not us tech companies? We know what we want. Why don't we help create those programs and help fund them, frankly? So it's not all just a burden on the government because the governments have to do a lot of different things, not just focus on getting us new hires, right? So yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff for companies to do in that space and pipeline and ultimately connecting the pipelines to actual jobs, right? That's the critical
absolutely.
part.
Absolutely, and you've spoken about how Microsoft is tackling it. Uh, are there other companies that you've seen who have embraced this and are doing it well? Are there any that you think these guys know what they're doing? This is exactly how you should be doing it.
Well, I don't want to be too myopic, but I think Microsoft is in fact leading the way on this sort of thing in the tech space. Like when we started the LEAP program in 2015, my partner and I, her name is Chun Lu. She currently runs the program. We actually went to Amazon in the very beginning after our first couple of cohorts, and we said, "Hey, look, this is what we're doing. We think you guys should do something like this too." Uh, and we can even share experiences and share curriculum and all the
Yeah,
rest. They now have a program that they call LEAP, which is their own thing. It's
yeah,
about getting people into their data centers, I think. Um, so they're doing something and it's substantial. Google has their own thing. I don't know if the sizes of the programs are like ours. We process through a few hundreds of people a year. Um, so I don't know too much about companies beyond those. There may be
mm,
more medium-sized companies that are like, oh my God, JP Morgan has this down pat. you know, I don't know those companies, but I know that Microsoft's is pretty substantial at this point because it's pretty mature, right? It's been around for years. The other programs I've seen are typically much smaller and not quite as pervasive. Like we're all over the world. We even are helping our customers now do diverse hiring because they look at what we're doing and they say, well, we want to do that too. Can you do that for us? Right. So we're now at the phase of maturity that our customers, and our customers are big, right? Our customers are asking us to help them do what we do because they see the quality of the program is so great. And it's federally accredited. And it was the first program in the industry to be that. So a federally accredited apprenticeship program. So it's like, yeah, I think Microsoft's got it going on. I don't know that anyone else is doing much better, at least not in the tech space, right? There are probably other kinds of companies that are doing better than we do, but in the tech space, I think we're doing pretty good.
Yeah, it really does seem that it's more than, like you said, it's more than check boxes. It's more, and it's about sort of removing those barriers as well. Because certainly, as someone living here in the UK and being aware of the way that some companies tend to look at candidates and tend to think about hiring, there is still a sense that you can, if you look at someone's CV or resume and you see the university they went to and the degree they have, you have a reasonable sense of confidence that this person could probably do something. Whereas, I mean, a lot of companies are saying, that's all well and good, but if you show me someone's GitHub, show me that it's active and they're working on open source projects, and show me that the caliber of the work, I don't need to consider that too much. It's really interesting that there is a lot of what it has to do is with companies kind of realizing the old school ways of looking at the quality of a person or looking at someone's skills are outdated, and actually there is a lot of cachet and capital to be found in those less than official, shall we say, kind of learning platforms.
Yeah, and you have to also recognize what skill sets we need today. Like when I was hiring people 24 years ago, I cared about their ability to debug the Windows kernel, to write an assembly language and stuff like that. It's like, well, I haven't seen people like that in years. They're just not needed. What I need more today is your ability to write a mobile app, your ability to know the React framework and the next framework and the next framework. So it's your ability to stitch stuff together quickly and prototype is perhaps even more useful than your depth in knowing how to code up a B tree from scratch. It's like, the people who need to learn that stuff will learn that stuff. But right now, today, the skill set we need is just at a different level, right? Because a lot of that low level stuff is like, that's not changing as fast. So you don't need everybody to be able to do that. But if you don't have developers who know how to do a web first sort of strategy, you're not going to get anywhere, right? So dropping things like when we started Leap, a CS degree was a requirement on all of our jobs. And that was the first thing I got removed, because it's like, really? Do they really need a CS degree? I mean, how about that mathematician who has a PhD who learned to code in a weekend, because it's not that hard? He doesn't have a CS degree. We're really not going to hire him because of that, right? That doesn't make any sense. So
absolutely. And one of the things that we often hear about here is that it's being able to actually pass a coding test or do the technical side of things. That's one side, but the soft skills side of things is also massively important. And there are certain things about being able to hire more diverse pools, that you get people who can see around corners that other people can't see around, and be able to bring the more soft skills to the table as well. Have you found that at Microsoft as well, that not only is it a more diverse skill set, but it's they've been able to see things that you previously haven't been able to see?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's demonstrable sorts of things with that. Like one of our Leap graduates was a 72-year-old retired airline pilot. And he was hired by our our security and identity team because he just had some keen insights that they had no ideas, right? He was ex-military and all that. So he just brings something to the table that you don't find out of your MIT graduate, right? He has a whole world and wealth and lifetime of experiences. So when you talk about identity or security, he can say, well, what about this and this and this and this and this? And they're like, I had no idea that wasn't even an issue, right?
Yeah.
So you have that kind of thing. And you have people, since they've come from different walks of life, like, okay, this person was a bank manager or a VP at a bank, or this person was a barista. So they know a lot about customer satisfaction and how to interact with the public and all these sorts of things. This other person was school teachers, and so she knows about teaching Python. So when she's interacting with customers and doing hackathons with them and stuff, she brings a wealth of experiences from being a teacher, right?
Yeah.
And she turns into the go-to person for learning Python throughout the company. So, you get all of this wealth because these people have had experiences and the coping mechanisms, like, oh, talk about team players. Well, what better than someone who's actually worked in teams, in difficult situations to bring into a tech team, and they're going to be a better collaborator, right? They're going to solve problems differently than if you've never done that, right? And you're just kind of a spoiled tech child who's like, well, it always goes my way because I'm always the smartest guy in the room. It's like, well, not always. So what do you do then? Well, this other kind of person who hasn't always had that experience probably has better coping mechanisms. So they do great, right? They make your team richer because you're including them. So
absolutely, absolutely. So I'm conscious of time, and if anyone who is following us live on LinkedIn or on YouTube has any questions for William, please fire them through on the chat link on the right. Before we get to that, William, I want you to kind of paint me a picture of what you think the next 12 to 24 months would be, considering 24 months ago we were just sort of on the brink of starting the quote unquote new normal in the pandemic world. But if you could sort of paint me a picture of the ideal scenario from your point of view, what would you like to see move forward beyond just being able to say, well, we have a more diverse team, we're now producing more results? What is the sort of things that you'd really like to see happen?
Well, there's concrete things, like currently I'm working towards hiring people in the Caribbean because it's yet another one of those untapped markets. If you say the word Caribbean, most people think cruise ship, sunshine, or poverty, and that's about it. That's the end of the conversation. But there's actually, tens of millions of people out in those island nations, and there's probably a lot of high intelligence there, and I'd like to go harness some of that. So we've been actively pursuing this for the last year, and we're related to your previous question about what do you do, K through 12 programs all the way through college, giving them opportunities, hiring people, all that sort of stuff. So that's a concrete thing. But in general, I'd like to see, 24 months is kind of short, but I'd just like to see the evolution as we go through the, we're all kind of in various parts of the tokenization phase of the D&I journey. I'd like to see us get just further down that path. I don't think we'll get as far as being able to say, oh, we're just colorblind, it's a meritocracy and all that. It's like, nah, we're not anywhere close to that. But I'd like to see us just keep making steps and not lose too many steps, because oftentimes what happens with, quote, D&I is as soon as there's signs of trouble, we back off, right? Yeah. It's like there's always a bigger issue. It's like right now we're going through challenges in Europe, to say the least. And that will cause people to circle the wagons and go, yeah, we hear you, D&I. But right now, we need the best programmers. It's like, okay, so you weren't really into the whole thing, were you? So I hope we just get to move past that, where people contract and say, well, times are tough, so the first thing to go is D&I programs, right? Because we think it's some sort of a charity thing. It's like, this is not charity. It actually is critical to you. It's mission critical. that would be my hope for the next 24 months, is that we don't scale back, right? We just keep going forward, right? That would be my hope.
And for you, you sort of touched on exploring other parts of the world for talent. You mentioned the Caribbean. What would be like a win for you in the next sort of the short term? Like, what are you sort of focusing on?
A win for me would be developing a center of excellence around something like data science or something advanced in a new place like the Caribbean. And not just going into a place like that and saying, and we're going to have you work on Windows bugs from 20 years ago, because that's oftentimes what happens is you go into a new place and you give them old work and, call it a day. My hope would be, my ideal is that I get to go into a place with new, important, cutting edge work. And that place becomes a center of excellence around whatever that is, right? That would be the ideal.
Absolutely. I mean, that's not only is it the goal to just have things established, but to have it doing something that's never been done before in a way that's exciting and interesting, and changes the way that we think about X, Y, Z. And I say X, Y, Z is as wide or as deep as wanted to be, particularly when it comes to tech.
Yeah, it's how you think about people. Like, oftentimes, before we went into Kenya, no one really thought anything about it, right? No one really, and even we had a president here who just kind of blanket stated that, African countries were just not good at all. And it's satisfying to say, well, hold on. There's lots of intelligent humans around the planet. And just because they don't look like you doesn't mean they're not intelligent. So it's very satisfying to be able to go into a place and say, see, we were right. And this is probably true in a lot of different places that we typically don't look. So to change our perspectives on things and say, yeah, if that's true of Africa, maybe that's true of a lot of Southeast Asia that we typically ignore, right? Other than for manufacturing of toxic products that we don't want to develop here. So I think it's just a way about how you step closer to being humanity, right? And looking at our fellow humans around the planet and saying, we all have something to contribute. Let's get to it. And let's remove all our barriers and biases and stuff like that, and uplift the whole planet, right?
Absolutely. I am very aware of the timing, and I think that is a fantastic note to finish up on. William, thank you so much for your time. I know it's early on the West Coast, so we certainly appreciate you speaking to us today. And if you have any further questions for William, please. The on-demand version of the interview will be available on our LinkedIn page. So please feel free to add any comments or any questions, and we will make sure they get through to William. And so we'll be back in a couple of weeks with another episode of Talking Tech. So keep an eye out on the Client Server LinkedIn page, and if you are in the market for a job in the tech sphere, certainly companies are certainly in the mood to hire here in the UK. I think all around the world, there seems to be an appetite for hiring people at the moment, particularly in tech. But consider Client Server. Come to our website at client-server.com. But from me, Michael Oliver here at Client Server in London. William, thank you so much for your time, and we will thank you. We will see you all again in the next episode. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.